Dr. Suzie Husain specializes in regenerative agronomy, soil diagnostics, and sustainable agriculture systems. With over 15 years of experience, she leads regional initiatives to improve soil governance, train practitioners, and develop certification frameworks that restore soil integrity across farming landscapes in the global south.
Hello everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for the Thrive team for inviting me. And before I start, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Suzie and the founder of the Shift Framework. And my work focus on the one simple, I think, but extremely uncomfortable truth, which is that our economies I can say that collapsing because our soils are collapsing, but and we are not measuring it, right? Because most of countries are still treat soil as agriculture issue. So but soil is actually economic infrastructure. It is the engine of food production and livelihoods, stabilities, water regulation, also carbon balance, and the community resilience. So the reason I focus on the regenerative economy rather than just only the soil health, it is because of the crisis that we are facing. We face is just not only just scientific. Actually, it is a structural. So when soil function decline, so the yield become more unstable. We can say the farmers become for governments need to increase their subsidies and food price rise. And we can see the entire rural economies become more weakened. So the exact pattern is seen today across even in Asia, African, Latin America, and it mirrors a historical civilization that collapsed for the same reason. So this session is aimed to show the real economic impact of soil degradation and why sustainability has failed, and how regeneration becomes the new economic model. And the next one, the science become behind the soil as a primary capital, and the last one, what you as academic, NGO, student, policies maker can shift today. So you will see the data from FAO, the World Bank, even from the EU soil law. So Indian regenerative model, African soil restoration programs, right? So you can see, and also you can see the real case study from the field work. So this session is not about the farming actually, it's more on the economic survival. Okay, so this slide you will see on the why regenerative economies, right? So the slide will show the most important starting point, which is you can see that most about 33% of the soil are already degraded. And in Global South, the number actually is 50 to 65. So this is a FAO 2022 consolidate the review when the country loses the soil fertility. Four things will happen. The first, yields become more yields become more unstable, and even the farmers increase their fertilizers. The second is the input cost rise. So, and the farmers will enter into a debt cycle. The third is on the food import will increase, and it will weakening on the national currency and GDP. And the last one, the most we see that things that most happen is right now is a rural poverty growth when a young people leave the agriculture. So the World Bank has estimates that we put the economics loss from the soil fertility declines. I think it's about USD billion or 6 to 10 billion USD annually in developing countries alone. So, but this is not a deeper issue. The soil loss is measured in national accounting. It's not measured in national accounting. So GDP rises because of fertilizer sales rise and not because ecological function improve. So this is why we call as invisible economic debt, which is the biggest blind spot in development economics. For regenerative economic loops, so here I want to show you that a regenerative economy is not a philosophy. It is a system. So let's walk through it. On the first, you can see a soil as a primary capital. So you can see that everything starts with the soil, right? So if the soil function collapse, everything downstream economic layer collapse too. So healthy soil will create a predictable, stable biological processes, for example, on the water infiltration and nutrient cycling, and even the root resilience. The third one is we call as productivity and yield stability. So we can see that regeneration will reduce our dependency on the chemical input and increase yield stability by restoring on the biological and also the soil structure. For example, so in India, farmers under APNF, right? So regenerative program achieve 20 to 30% of yield stability improvement without synthetic increases, right? So and then the third one is on the farmer income and livelihood. So the stable yield create the stable income, right? So in the Shiki study, what we did was smallholders will restore on the biological function, which is reduced on the fertilizer cost up to 20 to 35% that improving the income. And then the third one and the fourth one on the local market circulation, when the rural income rises, so it doesn't leave the country like industrial profit. So actually it circulates locally. So this is strengthens the SME, food markets, and also the services. And then the fifth point is on the social stability and institutional trust. So community with stable income will show lower stress, even the lower migration and higher trust in institutions. So this pattern is observed in Costa Rica, and also we can see on their ecological restoration model. So the last one is a reinvestment in regeneration, which means that the only a stable economy will reinvest into the ecological repair, and regeneration become more reinforcing. So this loop will show that the economic resilience will equal to the ecological function. So when soil recovers, everything else become possible, which means that we can say it is a direct chain effect in our generative economic loops. Okay, on the fourth slide on the hidden economic debt of soil degradation. So here I want you to make something very clear. So you can see that GDP growth and soil capital are moving in opposite direction, right? So you can see that the countries are more look stable on paper, but actually their ecological capital is collapsing silently. So let's break this finding. So you can see that 1/3 of the global soil are degraded. So right, so we can see even in FAO 2022, we can that 33%, which is that all the foundation of economic productivity is eroded, right? And then the second point on the global south, it can be increased up to 65%. Right, so we can say actually it is the behaviors burden that will direct effect on the food security and national GDP. And then the next one on the current economic models, which mean that we externalize on the soil loss that masking on the long-term collapse beneath on the short-term growth. And then the next one on the countries that remain food secure on paper while bleeding ecological capital in reality. And you can see that the national budget rising due to fertilizer subsidy. So this graph actually tell a story to you that we will never see in the national budget. Yeah, as long as the GDP goes up, right? So the soil capital actually will go down. Why? Because the modern agriculture extract more than more than it generates, right? So this is the same pattern we seen in the Mayan collapse, for example, right? So we can see on the soil exhaustion, rainfall collapse, right? We have a Roman grain belt collapse, which means that have combination of erosion and compaction. And then we have the dust bowl in the US, which means that it's coming from the tillage and also the monoculture. So our modern system repeat the history, but at a global scale. So we cannot actually build a strong economy on an eroding foundation. Where sustainability fails, right? So we need to understand that the sustainability has failed because it's protect degraded baseline. So it focus on efficiency and continuation and not the recovery. So I think this is my point of view, my stand. So we can see that sustainability maintains on the broken system, which means that we regenerate our regeneration rebuild on the lost ecological capital, and it keeps the farmers in maintenance mode, right? And then you measure on the carbon and input, not by residual, even the structure. And yield stability is celebrated, which means that yield inconsistency or yield stability is celebrated even when the soil function is collapsing. So it treats, actually, we are treating the symptom. We are not identify even the causes. So by looking at the regenerative perspective, actually it's different. So we need to rebuild or rebuild the lost function, which means that focusing on biologically, chemically, and structurally. So these are the good example that I can give you is, for example, in the EU soil monitoring law. So we can see that the EU realized that sustainability reporting was meaningless without measuring the redox, aggregation, or microbial activity. In India too, you can see they shifted from the input efficiency to soil function policy by scaling the 6 million regenerative farmers. Right, so this message is very simple. Efficiency cannot solve a collapse. Regeneration can. So this is the scientific backbone on the regeneration. So this is where the she triangulations evaluates the soil through the three infrastructure. So we are looking at the biology, for example, on the microbial respiration, fungal bacteria ratios, and the carbon pathway, and this govern the nutrient cycling, the disease suppression, and the root signaling. The second one is on the chemistry. We're looking at the pH buffering, CEC, calcium, magnesium, magnesium, potassium ratio, redox interaction, and this chemistry, without biology, it will still become unbalanced. And then the last one on the structure, for example, on the aggregation, porosity, infiltration, compaction, or water retention. So we can see that the traditional soil test measure only the chemistry, which is that we can say 92% of the worldwide. And this leave the system biologically blind, which is that why intervention fail, right? So we can say that economists also ignore the soil function, yet the soil function actually determine the productivity. So this is what the SHE framework trying to correct this by treating the soil as a living infrastructure, not a chemical profile. When the economy ignore the biology, why I say that? Because history has teach us a very painful truth. When biology collapse, civilization definitely will collapse. Right? Because on the FAO Global Review has shows that 87% of historical of on the agriculture collapse were triggered by the soil exhaustion. So for example, on the Mayan civilization, right? So we can see on the rainfall variability, nutrient depletion, and population can drop up to 70%. On the Roman Empire, because of the erosion combined together with the compaction, so it leads to the food system more instability and slowly the economic become declining. And then the monoculture, which is that we are more to depend on the synthetic fertilizers, that we can say that the mimics is which show the same pattern. So biological decline is always the first signal, and usually we can say the outcome of this declining leads to the economic collapse, which is the last that we can see. So what we see today in Africa, Latin America, even in Southeast outside, even is not a new. It is same collapse cycle, but accelerated by industrial intensity. So this is why the GDP should not be the first indicator of collapse. It should be soil function. Okay, regenerative economy means when we regenerate a foundation, we are not consume them, and we will make the soil health become one of the economic indicators, and we create the value creations that expand beyond the yield, which means that focusing on the function and also lead to the resilience. And productivity need to be measured by biological efficiency, not the chemical throughput. So the national resilience is built on the soil resilience. So this shift already happening globally. So for example, on the Costa Rica, it treats the ecosystem as a GDP stabilizers. Bhutan even use the soil water carbon stability as national indicators. And the next one, the EU, is integrating the soil function metric into the policies. So we can say that a regenerative economy restore what we depend on. Okay, on the soil as economic infrastructure. So in the global south, the soil decline reduce the farmer's income, just like I mentioned just now, it's about 20 to 50%, right? And our NGO, and this drive the poverty cycles and the food insecurity. So NGO also struggle because ecosystem deteriorate, right, faster than intervention that can catch up. So fertilizer-driven economy must collapse. So the government even only see on the short-term yield, but ignore on the long-term function. So 70% on this livelihood depend on the soil function stability. This means that soil degradation is not agriculture issue actually, it's a national security issues. So regenerative economy operate on 4 value pillars. First, we're looking on the biological capital, which is that the living engine, which means that focus on the microbe respiration and carbon flows. The second one on the ecological productivity, we're focusing on the water regulation, root resilience, and erosion control. And then the third one, we are looking on community wealth flows, which means that we have a stable income that built from the stable ecosystem. And the last one on the governance and measurement, which means that soil intelligence must be embedded into the policies. So without measuring the ecological intelligence, every investment become more unstable. Okay, on the measurement failure. All right, so I think this is the biggest institutional on the failure is a measurement, which means that we can see that 92% of the soil test only measure on the NPK, even measure on the pH only, and only we can say that less than 5% will focus measuring on the microbial activity or redox. On the academia, we still teach on the NPK-centric economy, and the NGO still measure the activities, for example, on training, seedling, input, not the outcome, which means that on the soil function. So without measurement on the reform, regeneration will stay as awareness, not reality. So that's why, this is why the SHIFT framework focus on the soil function diagnostic, not input indicators. So this is the real example for the SHE intervention that we did in Malaysia. So you can see that, for example, in this particular of the soil in our farmers, we can say we have the infiltration, low infiltration, weak aggregation, low microbial respiration, and even the high compaction, right? So after we do the intervention by using this triangulation, by combining on the physical, chemical, and biology. So what we did was, after the intervention or recovery, we can improve the infiltration 4 times greater within 12 months. And then on the microbial respiration, increase up to 42%, that which indicate or showing that the nutrient cycling has been restored. And then we can see on the soil aggregation. Right, so soil aggregation, for example, increase about 25 to 40%, that reducing on the erosion risk. And definitely when you have corrected all of this, we call as a domain, so the yield start to respond. All right, so yield will follow on the biological recovery, not the fertilizers. So this is proof that the soil recovery is the economic driver, not the input intensity. Okay, let's have a look on the global evidence. Right, so around the world, you can see that, for example, under the EU soil monitoring law, right, so they are shifting from the yield to the soil function. So what they did right now is more focusing, instead of focusing on the chemical dependency, then they're focusing on the soil function. What the factors that contribute to the soil health that lead to make sure that can give the better yield, right? So for example, it definitely will include on the biology. And then we have on the India, APNF. So you can see that we're scaling up on the 6 million of farmers into the regenerative system. And then we have the Costa Rica, which means that we increase on the GDP resilience to the ecological restoration. And the last one on the biological soil program to buffer the climate shocks. So the governments now start recognize soil as a national infrastructure. We need to understand that the regeneration multiplier effect. This is, I think, you can see that on the World Bank 2023 shows that every $1 in soil regeneration can give a return about $3 to $14, right? Because regeneration will reduce on the risk, and the risk is the most, I think, expensive cost in developing economies. So when you repair the soil, you will reduce the input dependency, which means the input dependency will goes down, and then the water resilience will goes up, and in household income more stability more increases, and also the economic stress definitely will reduce, and local economy become more stronger. So this is, I think, the regeneration multiplier that has been talking about. Okay, I think for the breakout group, I want you to choose an ecological problem, which we have the soil, water, carbon, biodiversity, and even the community resilience. And please answer these 5 questions, right? So, what is failing? What is the hidden cost? And what is the regenerative pathway? What the barriers, and also on your key insight, because I think this will help you to translate into the big concept in your own context. Welcome back. You can see my slide. All right. Before we go to our next, right? So I think maybe each of the group can give you reflection. So I believe you have a various backgrounds from academics, NGO, researchers, right? So even the students, policy thinkers. If each of you, for each group, please give some one actionable item that you have been discussed on what we are being assigned to.
Would you like to share my screen? Yeah.
Yep. Hi again, everyone. I think for me and my group, for question 1, I think we've chosen to go with carbon. Okay, so for identifying one failing ecological function in our context, we've chosen to go with carbon. That's for question 1. And question 2, to map the downstream economic social cost. For question 2, I think the answers that we come up with were, more greenhouse gases being emitted to the atmosphere, GH effect, more disasters because of global warming and sea level rising. For question number 3, identify one regenerative mechanism that restores function. I think there are a couple of answers that we've discussed and we've come up with. Is to plant more plants or trees, reduce the usage of fuel, and also reduce the emissions of toxic gases into the atmosphere. So that's for number 3. Number 4, discuss barriers preventing adoption. I think there are quite a couple of barriers that we've identified within our group. I think one would be more economical industries being with the expansion of with more economical industries and the expansion of industries all around the world is one of the barriers that is preventing the adoption of number 2 would be the building of new houses. The constant building of houses and development that is occurring all around the world is one of the contributing factors as well. One of the major ones is a lack of knowledge and education and awareness or outreach awareness programs going out to remote areas or just areas there that we have a lot of forest and a lot of vegetation and also diverse ecology that we have within those different areas. So, okay, for number 5, I think to summarize the group insights into a actionable shift. I think for us, I think we've come up with a couple here. We have to abandon the idea of we need more, meaning to say that as an organization, we have many profit-based organizations that, you know, they set a certain target for the year, and then as they progress on with we have bonuses and all that coming in. So the CEO or somebody or the top management team might, you know, push for them to continue to do more. So we have to abandon the idea of we need more. So just to get whatever it is that we've set our targets on, and that's it. But that's one. Two, I think we have to consider the key factors that that affects the environment, creating more, and also try to create more alternatives like solar energy, or be more innovative in creating out or innovating other sources of energies that we might use that would not harm our atmosphere at the moment, rather than using fuels and oil and all those other gases that is really contributing towards the carbon emissions to the atmosphere. So yeah, I think Dr. Suzie, there's a question for you down below that I think I'll let you.
Most of the farmers burn the residue on large scale, but no any management recycle. Yeah. All right. I will answer it after this.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
think with that would be my group one. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Charles. And the your group presentation. All right. So I think thank you for you and your group. All right. So I appreciate your clarity of your presentation. You explain the points very well, and I can see the group put thinking into the whiteboard. Right, so I want to reflect something at that important here. Right, so because it is common pattern in a global conversation, because you choose the carbon, right, as the failing ecological function, right? So this makes sense because this is the most visible and the most talked about. But the carbon usually is a symptom actually, yeah, not the root failure, right? So when the carbon goes wrong, usually it's come from what? Soil losing structure, water cycling breaking, right? So vegetation declining. So the carbon become the outcome of deeper ecological failures. Right, your downstream impacts, yes, correct. But for example, on the Moji HG, warming, even disaster, rising sea levels. But all these are happening because ecosystem stop performing basic function, right? Like water regulation, cooling, infiltration, and your regenerative mechanism, right? For example, like planting trees, reducing fuel, right? So this is a good action, but I want to help you to go one layer deeper, which means that you need to understand the regenerative mechanism must target on the function, not symptom. For example, if the soil is breathing poorly, for example, right? So it will increase the biological activity. Or even if the water is not infiltrating, so we need to repair the structure. If the carbon is unstable, so we need to rebuild what? Carbon sink, right? So not the only reduce emission, all right? So I think tree planting is powerful, yes, I agree. But the reason is it works because we restore the root depth, infiltration and microbial networks. So instead, we're saying that planting more trees, the regenerative mechanism becomes restore biological and structural function, so carbon become more stable again. Right, so this is more precise, and this is what regeneration really means. Right, so so this is my perspective. Right, so I thank you for you and your groups. Right, so you identified the global language carbon, and now we need to translate it into regenerative language function. All right, okay, thank you.
Okay, so this was what we came up with. So on the first question, identify one failing ecological function in your context. So there is both carbon and soil. So on the carbon problem may be global, but it isn't on a regional scale. In context to Nepal, this was from Dishan. Actually, maybe I can let Dishan like explain on this, so she'll have more context on that. Dishan, are you able to?
Yeah, I
talk?
can.
Okay.
So the problem I chose in context to Nepal was both soil and water, as in like carbon problem may be global, but when it comes to Nepal, I think its ecological fragility in terms of its landscape, um, uh, it should be both. It is both like soil and water, because I think our biggest constraint is the geography itself. So we have to like find a way to work with the hills, with the mountains, and and the landscape. So because since we are like because of our geographical location, we are very vulnerable and prone to natural disaster. We have the glacier lake outbursts, we have floods, we have like every year we have landslides during the monsoon season. We have then in the dry season we have forest fire, which causes epidemics, migration, relocation, destroys crops. There is road disruption when there is landslides, and then there is road accidents. So economic and social costs, there are plenty, to name a few. So on regenerative mechanism, I think it could be what I understood was how to make our fragile landscape stronger, right? So it could be, I don't know exact solution, but maybe something landscape based erosion control, or or policies that is focused on building like early warning system or infrastructures that could reduce the harm during disasters, or have a strategy for relocation or to deal with disaster. Mm, but mm, or others that have not included could be like not degrading our existing wetlands, uh, or maybe, I don't know, have more vegetations, diverse vegetations on the slopes, or have encourage agroforestries. So I cannot exactly, pinpoint a solution here, but I know what's preventing them is obviously the geography, like I said, and then it's followed by lack of accountability from the policy side, because even though we are not emitting so much greenhouse gases, we have taken a great deal of responsibility of reducing them in our NTC targets, and to reach net zero by 2045, which is kind of ridiculous, I would say, because we have other priorities and issues that we deal yearly. So I think prioritizing the national problem based on the livelihoods affected every year should be one thing. Maybe investing more on the R&D side, which is focused on their technologies, or I don't know. There should be some there must be some way to tackle to work with the mountains and the hills and the landscape based erosion control. So maybe more focus on that and invest on those, or maybe just teaching the youth, giving them first aid and safety learning to deal during disasters. I'm not sure if I understood, yeah, but that's all.
All right. Okay, thank you. Any members from group 2 want to add more?
Yes. Thank you so much, Dilasha. So on the next one, on the soil, so on the first question, the failing ecological function, that will be soil. So there is like nutrients depletion, erosion, and salinization. And mapping the downstream or the social cost, like caused by these. So poor soil, they end up causing reduced crop yields, which leads to higher food prices, then food insecurity. So that could be the downstream caused by these. And regenerative mechanism, soil composting, agroforestry, cover crops, regenerative agriculture. This could be the mechanism that could be deployed in order to deal with like the issue with the soil problem. And the other point, barriers preventing the adoption of this mechanism would be lack of awareness or education, policy misalignments, community resistance due to cultural and economic habits. Yes, that's because some people could be resisting the mechanism put across to help with this issue. Then summarizing group insight into one actionable shift. So I would say like shift is like a change in perspective. So launching a community soil health program, that could be one shift, as well as advocating for local policy and reward regeneration. That could be an actionable shift. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for group 2. I think what you are described, right? So as for Fancy and also for Dishan, they just mentioned, right? So I think this is what we exactly see across many fragile mountains, for example, like Nepal just now, right? So, and even this is what we are happening in the global south, right? So I think for Disha, you did mention that something very important, the carbon problem is global, not the Nepal real crisis, right? So it's a salt and water, and I think this is the key that everyone to understand, right? So first, when a country that has a high ecological fragility, the priority must be the function, not the carbon accounting, right? So what Nepal facing right now, for example, on the glacier, lake outburst floods, or the slope failure, and so on. So actually, these are not a carbon emission issues, right? So all these are soil, water, vegetation failures. They are come from the landscape, losing its capacity to absorb the water, hold the soil, and regulate the temperature. And so, Dishan, what you are called walking with the mountain, actually, this is actually the words that you mentioned, actually exactly the regenerative language. All right. So I think on the soil part, on the Fancy, you just mentioned, I think on the three I think you captured the three important big problems that many countries are facing right now. At the same time, nutrient depletion, erosion, salinization, and these often happen together. And they create a very dangerous downward spiral in agriculture. All right, so I think the whole room, in this room, need to understand and see that on the deeper system behind that, right? For example, on nutrient depletion, what has been lost? Again, loss on biological function. All right, so when the soil lose nutrients, usually because biology is collapsing. All right, so for example, this is a study has been carried out of FAO and also Rotterdam State. So a long-term trial that showed that nutrient loss is almost always linked to what? Continuous removal of biomass, a lack of organic matter that return, weak microbial activities, and this situation, when fertilizer alone that we apply never fix the problem, because you need to understand soil is not a storage system anymore. It become a pipe, right? So this is one example. And if you are looking on the salinization, it shows on water function failure, which is that salinity is rising in many dryland and irrigated area because of what? Poor drainage, over irrigation. And once salinity crosses certain threshold, right? They reach a certain threshold, even the best seed cannot grow, right? So this is not the nutrient issues, it's a water mismanagement issues. So now the downstream social costs that you it explained, right? So poor soil lead to the lower yield, lead to higher impact on the higher food prices, and last on the food insecurity. But actually it even deeper than that. So when you have a poor soil, right, so it leads to what? Higher debt for farmers, migration of youth, conflict over waters, right? So now, so that's why we say that soil health is just not agronomy. So economy, actually it's economic policy and social stability, right? So if we look at the regenerative mechanism, right, so you mentioned just now on the composting, agroforestry, cover crops, these are correct, I agree. But how this practice will target on the function? Composting will restore biology and nutrient cycle. Cover crops restore this structure and erosion, right? So if you see this, right? So this example, you can see that regenerative mechanism work very fast when what? They target on the right function, right? So we need to understand this, that this is why the regeneration must be supported by the government, not just only training the farmers, right? But we need to aligning on the subsidies, improving the extension services, and reducing on the risk of the adoption, right? So I thank you for bridging on this point, right? So I think your group has picked on the classic soil system failure. And I think this is exactly that we need on the thinking that leads on the real regenerative solution.
For our group, we had a couple of different answers for the first question, which, so a couple of the points for failing ecological functions were water use and also land conversion connected to intensive animal agriculture, as well as waste runoffs. The other one was soil power plants. Soil doesn't have enough capacity to hold water, leads to poor plant growth. So just for both of those, a couple of the points for question 2 was an impact for water use was issues with impacts on agriculture, obviously, for restricted water use and water restrictions for the general public. For the second point on soil holding enough water, there was a social cost of yield and quality of crops, thus affecting the income of the family as a social cost as well. For number 3, we had, in terms of identifying a regenerative mechanism that restores function. So for the water use side of it, where I'm based, we have desalination plants and recycling of wastewater. So that was one approach. Didn't quite get to this, but in terms of intensive animal agriculture, obviously another approach is alternative means of agriculture, but also how it connects obviously to the broader context as with water use as well. Obviously there are factors like climate change that impact on drought, so I didn't quite get to add that, but that will be one component of water use issues, and also a kind of solution for the impact on land conversion and biodiversity impacts or ecological impacts from intensive animal agriculture, and sort of coming back to climate change would be sort of regeneration or reforesting of land, and to again, just on a systemic level that could address that issue both in regional areas ecologically, but also broadly, as we know across the planet, as with carbon sequestration. For the second point, for the other issue with soil not holding enough water, using organic matter to restore oil function was raised, and the barriers include lack of facilities, expenses of fertilizers, and monetary restrictions. Which brings us to the fourth point of what some of the barriers preventing adoption of these different approaches can be. So obviously they are, for both points, there were ecological impacts and technical constraints in some countries, obviously financial as well. And also having a more holistic approach to water use is necessary. So there can also be a political barrier. So for certain industries, there can be a political barrier, so at the policy level that needs to occur. So we could see that with animal agriculture, for example. We can see that in terms of regulation of water use in general, but also it does bring us back to, say, climate change again, and effective policy on mitigating that in terms of taking holistic and regenerative approaches connected to things like addressing land conversion by reforestation of areas and innovative approaches like that. So again, that rests on that policy level. And another quick point that was mentioned was that it's not a quick fix. Obviously, it needs to. There's no silver bullets. That in different contexts, these things are needed to be addressed in different ways. So for different areas, for different communities, there'll be different solutions. So some of these will be at the policy level. And there will be different factors to consider for developed countries as opposed to developing countries, and taking into consideration, obviously, political, social, and ecological factors in terms of what the barriers are and what the solutions are. But there will obviously be, on the grassroots level, certain things that certain farmers will be able to do, but there is also what's required at the policy level to help us facilitate that. And obviously those solutions will be different for different contexts globally, in effect. So that was basically what we had covered for our sections.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and thank you to your group 3. I think you touch on the several issues that normally are treated separately, right? For example, on the water use, land conversion for animal agriculture, runoff, and also on the soil that cannot hold waters, for example. But in reality, these problems are deep connected, right? So I think on the reflection on your ideas back truth on the regenerative lens, right? For example, water is not only used it's not only a scarcity issue, actually it's a function issue. Why? Because many countries, they are thinking that water quantity problem, right? But when they go deeper in a problem, right, actually water infiltration and water storage in the soil, right? So your point is correct. So if the soil cannot hold the water, then even when rain comes and the land behave like a hard surface, everything runs off, nothing stopping. This is right now, even we have in Malaysia, we are some state that have flooding right now, right? So this is what FAO estimate on the 60% of global rainfall never enter to the soil, right? Actually, this is not a climate issue alone, right? It is a soil structure issues, right? So I think I think on the perspective that you mentioned, right? So the climate impact, the land use pressure, and community habits, right? So these are real, but the deeper barrier from this system are designed around extraction, not regeneration, right? So for example, water policies, subsidy, land use planning, right? So all these usually are more often push the farmers and the company to extract water and land very fast, not to restore them. So to shift them to regenerative practice, we need what? Incentive for soil water retention, policy that reward infiltration, and even community training on the water soil links. Right, so I think your group raised on important points and they are connect perfectly to the theme to this session. Right, so water function, soil function, land function, and all this must be restored together. Right, thank you for group 3. And all right, for the last group 4, any representative?
Hi. In our group, in talking about the challenge, the first point was the soil and the water, and you were exactly right. They both go together, and to have one without the other, you really can't. And so was sharing that what we work with here in the United States is switchgrass. And switchgrass is a native warm season grass here in this country, has an extensive root structure, goes 6 to 12 feet down, and grows on marginal land. And when you were looking at the downstream economical costs, the soil quality, as soil quality depletes, we end up with more marginal land that will not support food production. And, you keep increasing and adding the fertilizer, and you're right, the water washes it all off. Well, that goes into, the rain washes it off into the water supply, and you have this vicious cycle that goes around. And the Chesapeake Bay area on the east coast of the U.S. has actually been planting switchgrass to help filter the water that comes into the bay, but also to prevent the soil erosion. And because of the extensive root structure, the microbial content in the soil, it regenerates that and helps to regenerate the soil. Jacqueline in our group was also talking that she has recently moved, and in her gardening, the soil there is very bad. There's a lot of construction debris and things like that, which I think is what we see when you look at these large metropolitan areas. You have so much land development and so much soil that gets destroyed. and we're losing that top fertile layer and we're coming down to the stuff underneath, and it's how to get that back. And so it was a really fun discussion. I enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you very much for group 4. Yeah, I think if we are talking about the soil and what it is very big, I think this is a very something that is very exciting, and also there's something that never ending, right, discussion actually, because they have some example, right? So I want to highlight from what Roger mentioned, right? So I want to highlight on the perfect model that how regeneration should be understood globally, right? You made one powerful statement that at the beginning. I think I'm very take note this very well, and everyone also, please, that we need to bear in mind that soil and water cannot be separated. This number one. And this is very true everywhere, whether in US, even in Malaysia, even in Nepal, or even in Africa, right? So if the soil lose the structure, water become a problem, right? So if the water stop infiltrating, soil become a problem, and both fail together. All right. For example, the switchgrass. I think this is a perfect illustration of what regeneration actually looks like. Right? So you explain that switchgrass has a root about 6 to 12 feet deep, and this is exactly the principle. All right. So the deep roots lead to the strong structure and lead to the stable water function, and also have a good living biology. And what I want the group notice to this is switchgrass is not a climate solution. It is not a soil amendment. It is a functional system that rebuilds the landscape. All right. So let me show how. Let's have a look on the deep root itself. How it rebuilt the soil structure. How the switchgrass works on the marginal land, right, as a strategic move, and how we can use the Speak Bay example as a world class, right? So I think if we go deeper, right, on the group, I think this is something important that we can take note on our discussion today. Regeneration begin when we match with the solution and function. Right. So, for example, soil erosion. What the function is use the deep soil root species. Water pollution, use vegetative buffer. Marginal land, use perennial system. And this is why I always say regeneration is engineering with the life, right? So I think this is the big takeaway for the whole room, that I think that the group, your group has proved the most powerful solution, that which is that not often a technological, they are ecological. All right. So for example, we are using that just now on the switchgrass and so on. Yes, they are cheaper, they are faster and more resilient. Right. So I think thank you for Roger and the team. Right. So I think this is a kind of practical and grounded thinking that regeneration needs. Okay. So I think we go on the closing, or you have any question before we end, not end, any have a discussion, or maybe we end of this session. How about I can
Okay, Dr. Suzie, thank you. I think if someone has a question, we'll just share it on the chat, and then at the end of the session, we'll ask you. But at this time, I'll give you opportunity to give us your last statement. Welcome.
Okay, all right. So before that, let me share on my slide. For this, our specific reflection, we already has been discussed on for the idea synthesis, right? So we now connect, right? So we have already shared the pattern, we shared the failures, we shared the opportunities, and I think this is where the room become a regenerative system itself, right? So let's have a look on the shift model, right? So I think this is on the system, we understand the interconnection, have measure the function. This is what I said just now on the function, right? On the integrity, act with a scientific honesty. We have the feedback loop, monitor, correct, and refine. I think for the monitoring is the critical part that everybody not sometimes overlooked. And on the last one, on the transformation, which is that long-term structural change. So shift actually is the mindset for regenerative economy that we can use as a benchmark. Okay, I think this is very important. So what must change now? So from our discussion, what must change now, right? So I think there are three urgent changes. First, you need measure the soil function, not measuring the crops. Repair on biological and structural decline. We need to change the policy incentive. All right. So, and then we stop input dependency economy. And the last one, we invest in regenerative skill and institution, because I think after listening to all groups, one thing becomes very clear. We don't usually have a climate problem or a carbon problem. We have a soil and water function problem, right? So because I saw that every group have mentioned the same core failure. Soil cannot hold the water. Water, it cannot infiltrate, right? So this is what we must change now. Not only the practice, it is the way of we diagnosis the problem, right? So right now, the world just looking at the symptom. We talk about the carbon emissions, net zero technology, right? So, but if the soil is dead and the water cycle is broken, none of this will save livelihood, right? So we need to change is this system priority. Right. Okay. For the call to action, I think my call is very simple, right? So we must rebuild the value from the ground up. For example, for the academic, teach on the function, just not only the chemistry. And NGO need to measure the regeneration, not the activities no more. Right. And then the student choose regenerative careers, policymakers treat the soil as infrastructure. I think this is very important because we need to shift the lens from fixing climate to repairing the function, right? So because we know the climate is too big, carbon is too abstract, right? So if the soil hold the water again, right? So your climate outcome is already achieved. Okay, I think that's all from me. Thank you very much.